Okay, my screen is up, so we're gonna start. This is the application we built yesterday. First of all, imported enter, imported everything in it. We also imported TTK because we say that with TTK, the styling of enter looks pretty better, and that's why we're using TTK. Then we also imported SQLite 3, which is the database that we're going to be using. So we quickly created the class student DB, then created the constructor that initializes everything, helping us to do the layout, the GUI. So we gave the title of student management database, geometry of 300 by 400. Then we added in the widgets from the first row, second row, third row, fourth row. Then we created a window, the root window from the TK class. Then we created an object of this student DB. You can see this is student DB. So we created an object of it, which is third DB. Then we'll now run this using the root.main loop. And once you have this, I'm going to run it now and show you. So if I say Python student space student.py, I run it, I should be able to see the GUI. So that's what we're going to do. Okay. So I'm seeing the GUI now. To make you see it, I'm going to reshare my screen. So this is the GUI that comes out once you run. Say this. So if I extend this, can you see the GUI? If you extend this, you're going to see the complete title, student management database. So this is the first row, having the label and the entry. The second row, label and entry. The third row, having the submit button and the update button. And the fourth row, having the leaks box. So what we want to do is that when we type in the name, say first name, Augustine, then we'll come here and type in second name, EMEKA. Once we click on submit, we want EMEKA Augustine to be here. So currently it's not doing that because we've not connected this to database. Then if EMEKA Augustine is already here, once you click on it, it should also come out here so that you can edit. And instead of having only EMEKA, you can have EMEKA or no. And once you click on update, the name now will be updated. So that's what we're trying to do. I'm going to close this down so that we can do that. So we are going to be connecting a database, and to effectively set up our database, we want this code that we already have here, just the code for the GUI, which is what we're seeing. So once we are done creating the GUI, we should be able to first of all, we should be able to call for the database to be created. So to make this call is very simple. Simply say self dot setup self.setupdb. That's the name of the function that we want to use. So self.setupdb. So once we called it, it should be able to set up our database. But we've not written this function setupdb, so we're going to write it very soon. Because that's the function that will do the connection for us. Then apart from calling the apart from setting up the database, because you need to set it up before it can be used, we also need to update the list box. That student list box, we need to be able to update it. We need to update the student list box. Immediately our application comes up, we should be able to update the list of box with the what? Student list. And how do we go about this? Just the same way, we can do this by simply saying self.update underscore leaks box. So that's the function that will be doing that for us. But we've not created this function. So create all this in feature. So, but I want to let you know that immediately after initializing the GUI, those are the next two things that will be done to get it effective. So what's the essence of updating the list box? The essence of updating the list box is that once this GUI comes up, all the names of students that you had earlier added that are in the database, we want them to come out here in the list box. You understand? Before you can start performing a new operation. So that's the essence of this. Whereas the essence of this one is to set up the database. So let's try and set up the database now. But before I set up the database, I want to quickly get to this very list box that I created. You can see this list box. I want to bind it to the I want to bind it so that let me run this again so that you see what I want to explain. So I want in such a way that once you use a cursor, let's say we have a name Augustine EMEKA in this list, but once you click on this cursor, I want the name Augustine EMEKA to appear here so that I can be able to edit them. You understand? So to do that, you need to do what we call binding. So you bind the cursor to that list box so that once you click on any item there, it will come out in the field so that you can be able to update. So to do that, I simply say self dot list step dot list underscore box dot bind. So that's what we're doing, dot bind. And what do we want to bind it to? And to do binding, this is the syntax that you use. So you use double angle bracket. Then you simply mention what you want to bind, the class, which is list box select. List box select. So once you do that, you can close up the angle bracket again. Then get after the single quote and now write the function. So what function will do that? What function is going to help you find? The function is simply self dot load underscore students. So once you click on it, you should be able to load the students for you. So that's what we have here, self underscore load students. For this self underscore load student function, we've not written it. So we're going to write all that. So having done this, we can now start setting up our database. And that is what we're going to do now. So let's set up our database. And to set up our database, we're going to need some initial variables that we're going to be working with. So let's declare these variables. So number one variable we're going to be declaring is is a variable that will, this variable, what will be the function? Is going to hold a database connection. So that's the number one variable. So what do we call this variable that will hold the database connection? We simply call it db underscore con. And we're going to initialize the value to 0. Then having done that, we are going to also create another variable. And what is this variable going to do? This variable is going to be a cursor variable. And what is it going to be used? It's going to be a cursor that is going to be used to traverse the records of a result. So this variable is going to help us to traverse the records of a result. So what are we going to call this variable? We're simply going to call it a cursor. That's the name of this variable. I'm going to initialize it to 0. And finally, we are going to create another variable. And what will this variable do? This variable will store the current student selected. So that's what this variable is going to do. The current student selected is going to store it. So what do we name this variable? We're going to name it core underscore student. So it's telling us that it's the current student. And we're going to initialize this to also 0. So having done that, we can now quickly set up our database. That's what we're going to do now. So we say set up the database. So with this, you will know how to connect database to any application that you're going to be developing in future. It's not just this very application. Any other application that you'll be setting up in future, this is how you go about it. Is that clear? Make sure that you bring in the variables that you use in working on the database. Then you set up the database. So how do we set up the database? So create a function that does that. So we have to create a function that will set up the database. Please, I'm going to take this out from here. I'm going to take all these variables that I created. I'm going to simply say cut, because I don't want them to be on the constructor. So they have to come up here. This is where they are supposed to start. Are we clear on that? So put them here, let them be up there. So once we are done that, we can now set up our database. So let's set up our database. Let's set up our database. So please make sure that this is on the same line. I'm gonna take the cursor on Control C. Make sure that you take this back to be, you know that indentation matters a lot. So they have to be on the same line as the function definition. Okay, so with that we are okay. So I'm gonna write a function that sets up the database by saying def. What did we call the name of that function? Where we during the init in the other side, we'll call it what? Setup what db, isn't it? So we have setup underscore db. So that's the name of that function. And it's going to take in the argument of what? Self. And after that, you already know that we have to put a colon. So now let's do the setup. Number one thing we do in setting up a database is that you must open or create a database. That's the number one thing. So number one thing you do is that you open or say create a database. So how do you open or create a database in MySQL? So MySQL is a special type of query language that you'll be using to interact with your database. So let's learn how to do this. So to do this, you simply say self.db connect, and you know that you already have this variable dbcon. Please, I made mistake. I said db instead of b. I said bd instead of db. So please change it to db. db simply means database db. So make sure that both of them are db. So once I say self.dbcon, then I can simply say is equal to. So this is how you create a database. Simply say SQL3. That's what we're using. SQL3 dot connect. That's how you create the database. Dot connect. Then inside the bracket, you're going to put what is the name of the database you want to create. You are going to name this database student.db. That's how you name a database. And we've now created a database and we've opened that very database. Very simple. That's how you do it. So the next thing we are going to do now, after creating this database, is that we are going to let the cursor to transverse this database. No, we created a cursor that can traverse the database. So let's use this cursor and transverse. Transversing simply means to go through the records in the database. So the next thing we'll do is to do what? To make sure that the cursor is able to do what? Traverse. So the cursor traverses the records. So it goes through all the records. So how do you write a statement that does that? Simply write that by saying self, just the way we did the first one, dot the cursor. As you're writing it, you are saying it there. So this variable, we're going to assign it to the value of what? Self dot db underscore con. That connection that you had area created, you now say dot cursor. That's how it does that. Very simple. Dot cursor. So with that, the cursor is able to transfer through all the records. Then finally, what we'll now do is to create the table. What's the table that is going to be in the database? So that's the next thing we do. So we say that we'll now do what? Create the table if it does not exist. So it's very important that you note that you only create the table if it does not exist. If it exists, then there's no need to create it. So to do this, I'm going to simply put this in a try-catch block. Why I'm putting this in a try-catch block is in case if there is any error, the error could be taken care of. So to create this table, I simply say self dot db underscore con. I'm establishing this connection. Dot execute. That's how you create a table. Dot execute. So what do you want it to execute? So we're gonna put what we want it to execute. We simply want it to do what? Create table. And why are you're only creating when if it does not what? Exist. So once you say that, so what is the name of the table you want to create? You want to give this table the name of student. So take care of the way I wrote it. So when you create this table now, what are going to be the fields? What are going to be the columns in the table? Number one, we want it to have an ID. Each student should have an ID. And this ID is going to be what type of data? It's going to be an integer. And this ID is also going to be the primary key, very, very important. This ID is going to be the primary key. So we'll specify that as we are creating it. And this ID is also going to be auto-incrementing. So why do we want the ID to auto-increment? We want it to auto-increment so that even if you don't put any ID, it will give you an ID with one value bigger than the one that you already have. So it's always good that you do auto-increment for your primary key. And this ID should not be null, so there should always be a value. So after creating the first field, which is ID, we create the second field, and the second field we are going to call it what? Fname. We're going to call it what? Fname, which is first name. And this first name, what kind of data is it going to be? It's going to be a text, and it's also going to be not null. So what does not null mean? It means that you must fill it. You should never leave it blank. Then finally, what is the other field we are going to have? We are going to be having what? Last name. Depending on what we had on our GUI, that's what we are doing. And this last name is going to be of data type text, and it should also not be what? Null. That means you must fill it in. So those are the fields. So once you're done putting in these fields, you can now close this bracket and put a colon. So that is it for that. So that is how you create your table. Very simple. You should note that. So after doing this, I can simply now say, since I've created this table, I'll commit it so that it can be in the SQLite database. So to commit it, I simply say self.db underscore con.commit. Commit simply means effect the change. That's the meaning of commit. So once I do this, I'm okay. So I can simply do Control S to save this. So that is what I have. So I've simply done the right thing, which is creating this database. Okay. So because I put it in a try and catch block, it's gonna try to create this database. But what if it finds out that it cannot create this database? What's gonna happen? If there is an error, let's say there was no connection or any form of error, what's it gonna happen? So what's gonna happen, I'm gonna put it in the except block. So whenever you use try, you must use except. They work hand in hand. So if there is any error, I simply want SQLite 3 to perform a very common operation called operational error. You can see it's already written out here. I can just click on it. So what does this operational error do? It simply does it and it will print out something for us. So what do we want printed out? We simply want error to be printed out. So what's going to be the content of this error? It's going to simply say table not created. So we want us to, if there is a problem that this table could not be created, we want it to actually say that table not created. So that will tell you that there is an error, then you know what to do. So that's simply how to create a database and add it up to your application. So take note of that. So in subsequent class, we are going to now be writing the other functions that will use this very database that we created and connected to effectively make our application look like what we want it to look like. So with that, we're going to be signing off for now to join back later. So please write this code. Make sure your code is not yielding any error so that once you join up, you'll be able to you can be able to move together. So please write this code, understand them with the comments that are so that we'll continue once I join up. So we are joining up in what's the time now? This is so by sharp 11 we are joining up again. Sharp 11. So don't miss it. Sharp 11 we are joining up. Sharp 11 we are joining up. So take note, sharp 11 we are connecting it up. Thank you. God bless.